The cymoscope is the world's first scientific instrument that can make sound visible. Not graphically, of course, not like in conventional spectrum analysis, but as an analog pattern that accurately reveals the inherent geometry in sound and indeed in music. You know, like the invention of the telescope and the microscope that revealed previously invisible realms, the cymoscope reveals the once invisible realm of sound.
It's the Friday Feels, and we're back with your first sip of the weekend. You're now tuned in to this week's episode of Your Happy Hour. I'm your host, Nicole Carmine, and it's amazing to have you here, joining me this week as we uncover the truths about being a human and a working professional. What are you up to this Friday? Well, whatever it is, this moment is just for you. And we're back with another episode on the Feels space. It's your Happy Hour series within the Feels podcast. And this is our very last episode for this season number 3. It's been an incredible season. It's just thrilling if I think back to all the different themes we've had, different guests on the podcast, and I'm so excited to have this guest today. I get to welcome you, John Stuart Reid, to the Feel Space and the Your Happy Hour podcast, and I'm so delighted that we get to finish the season with a conversation with you, because this is a topic that is very close to my heart. As a singer-songwriter, someone who is just wanting everyone to live in a state of sound, living in a state of song is something I advocate for, and it's a bit of a slogan in my own life, and to follow our joy and what that looks like. So a big, big welcome to the space.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It's wonderful to be with you. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's such a pleasure. And I also want to mention, for those who are listening in only with audio, because this will go out in audio and video a bit later, there is a little trailer that we'll be adding to this that will indicate a little bit more about what John does. But I'd love for you to give us a little bit more of a journey into how you became who you are. I mean, you've dabbled in physics, you've dabbled in acoustics, you've had an incredible life. I mean, it's just some of the stories that I've heard you tell. And how did you end up just becoming who you are today, and what's the journey been like into your own Feels life?
Sure, I'll give you the very short version because we've got a lot of wonderful things to discuss in this podcast. But the short version is that, even as a child, I was fascinated by sounds. So, I remember having, age 3, I was gifted one of those spinning tops, where you push with the lever and it makes this beautiful musical chord. And I played with that so much, I eventually broke it. But then after that, I was still, fascinated by all kinds of sounds. So I guess you could say the sound is in my blood. And I don't know which ancestor perhaps gifted me, with this particular interest in life. But anyway, suffice to say that eventually, after a career in engineering, I became an acoustics engineer. And that actually, even as a young man, I had wanted to be an acoustic scientist. But my father at that time suggested that I go into engineering first. And I think it was a really good idea, actually, because now, as an acoustic physics scientist, this is my second career, I now have this wonderful kind of umbrella overview of both engineering and science. And I see I can make discoveries, for example, that I would never have made if I didn't have both of those careers under my belt, so to speak. So it was it was great advice that my father gave me all those years ago. And so now I've had these two different experiences in life, both from the engineering point of view and from the scientific point of view. But the real life-changing event that put me on the path to becoming the scientist that I am today happened in the Great Pyramid of Egypt. My daddy and I had been, we were kind of amateur Egyptologists, really. We loved everything to do with ancient Egypt, and we had traveled together in Egypt several times. But an event occurred in early 1996 that was indeed life-changing. And the event concerned my dad and I being in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. Now, those of you who've been in that wonderful space, you'll know that it has an amazing acoustic. I mean, it's so quiet in there, apart from this tiny little buzzing sound from the fluorescent tubes. But apart from that, it's really, really quiet. And you can hear the blood coursing in your own ears. It's so quiet. And in that king's chamber, as they call it, there is a box of granite. It's supposedly it's a sarcophagus which is intended supposedly for the interment of the body of Khufu, the pharaoh whose pyramid that was. There's obviously a lot of controversy around that, but what I was interested in from an acoustics point of view was the resonance properties of that box. So, Nicole, if you strike it with the side of your fist, which you're probably not supposed to do, it's probably a bit naughty, but it doesn't really do it any harm. It's 3.7 tons of granite, right? But it is nevertheless highly resonant. And if you do strike it with your fist, it rings like a low-pitched bell. It has this wonderful sound, really complex sound. And anyway, because I knew it had these wonderful resonant properties, I wanted to lie in it and make a vocal glissando. I know you're very interested yourself, in vocalizations. What happened in this particular episode in my life is that every cell in my body felt like it was tingling at one particular vocal pitch. It was an amazing effect. I've since come to call it the Goldilocks pitch, or the Goldilocks zone, because it was just so magical. And if I went slightly above that pitch or slightly below it, the effect disappeared in my body. And of course, up to that point in time in my life, I'd been in acoustics, well, almost all of my life, and I'd never experienced anything quite like that. So I knew that it was something very special. And actually what it said to me in the moment, Nicole, is this feels like design. It felt to me as if this had been contrived by the ancient Egyptians for a particular purpose. So again, cutting this very short, I went back again in 1996, but this time having gained permission to carry out a whole array of acoustics experiments, which I did, and I learned a lot about the knowledge of the ancient Egyptians in terms of acoustics in that particular series of experiments. And we haven't got time to go into those, but for another time, I think you would find that fascinating because it's all connected with rebirth symbolism. Anyway, there was one experiment in late 96 that I didn't have time to conduct, and that was a cymatics experiment. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this word cymatics, it's C-Y-M-A and then atics, like anything automatic. And if you're not familiar with it, it's simply making sound visible on a membrane. So you have to know that obviously everyone knows that sound has vibrations, right? These vibrations are, in the case of sound in air, are moving the molecules in the air. And in this case, with my vocal apparatus, for example, they are jiggling, they're literally moving all of the atoms and molecules in the air right now, right in front of me. But when those movements of air encounter a membrane, then they imprint a pattern. It's a little bit like forensic science, where if you pick up a glass with your finger and your thumbs, you know that when you put it down, then in theory, there will be a fingerprint or a thumbprint on that glass. And even when you look really closely and you know it's there, you still find really difficult to see it with the unaided eye, the naked eye. But if you sprinkle on some talcum powder, immediately the fingerprint or the thumbprint becomes visible. Well, it's a little bit like that with cymatics. These days, in the experiment that I'm going to describe for you that I conducted in 97, it was concerning using particulate matter. So not talcum powder, but actually sand from outside the pyramid, because they've got a lot of sand in Egypt, of course. And I use sand as the revealing medium. I'll describe the experiment in a moment. But just first of all, the principle of cymatics. Sound vibrations encountering a membrane create a pattern. It's called a cymatic pattern. There's another definition that uses the word Faraday pattern. This is from Michael Faraday, who conducted experiments 200 years ago with the same kind of technology. So it's not new technology. This is really old technology, but now it has been updated to 21st century, as you'll soon find out. Anyway, so that's the basic principle. What I wanted to do, these resonances in the sarcophagus, I wanted to make them visible. And in order to do that, I needed to stretch a membrane across the open top of the sarcophagus. In this case, it was PVC, a plastic membrane, basically, stretched by 43 little bags of sand all around the perimeter. But just before I describe that experiment that was so life-changing, let me first of all just take a step back 3 weeks before going out to Egypt for the cymatics experiment. Because what happened was I injured my lower back quite badly, Nicole, and I was in a lot of pain. So much so that I thought I might have to basically cancel the whole mission, but I had paid a lot of money. You can't carry out these kind of experiments, or research without paying for them. And so I had paid quite a lot of money. And anyway, in the end, I just gritted my teeth, took probably too many analgesic pills, and just, thought I just have to get through this. And I did get into the pyramid. Other people carried the equipment in. I couldn't carry anything excepting my camera. The antiquities inspector was very kind, and he helped me to set up this experiment, even though I was in, great pain. So I stretched a membrane across the top of the sarcophagus. But before that, I placed a small speaker in the bottom, as if I was lying there. So now instead of me lying in the sarcophagus, I had this little speaker, and I could play any sound I wanted into that speaker. And so what I was intending to do here was to make visible all of the resonant properties of the sarcophagus by injecting into the speaker a series of pure tones, just very pure sounds. And so I did that. And what happened was absolutely astonishing, Nicole, because, with cymatic patterns, generally what you see is a kind of mandala-like shape. You get a circular pattern usually, and it's usually has multiple antinodes, maybe 5, 6, 7 antinodes. These are the elements, the geometric elements of the pattern. But in this case, what I saw was an ancient Egyptian hieroglyph appear on the membrane. Oh my goodness. It was such a shock to me because I hadn't expected anything like that. And now the antiquities inspector, he rushed over from where he was standing. I remember he was filing his nails and looking across at me with a kind of bored expression on his face. But now he rushed over and he said, "How you do that? How you do that?" He was really, shocked, as I was. And also now he was like, "How can I help you? What can I do, to help me?" And so we became a little team, and he would be scraping the sand off the revealing medium. I would take a photo first of all, which I did, and then he would scrape the sand off and then sprinkle more sand on, and then I would change the frequency of this tone that I was injecting, and then another hieroglyph appeared, and another. And so that day it was, I get goosebumps just now, just thinking about it. It was so astonishing. And so about 20 minutes into this experiment, suddenly I realized that there was no pain in my lower back. This pain that I'd had for 3 weeks, Nicole, right? And severe pain. And I'd been to a physiotherapist a couple of times. I'd taken all these anti-inflammatory pills and and analgesic pills. Nothing had really touched that pain, just maybe a little tiny bit, but really, not much. And that day going into the pyramid, I was in extreme pain. And yet 20 minutes of sound in the King's Chamber, no pain. Well, in the moment when that happened, I thought, I know what this is. At least I think I know what this is. This is an effect of endorphins flowing in my bloodstream because I'm so excited, like who wouldn't be seeing ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs pop out on an ancient Egyptian sarcophagus? So I was excited, and so was the antiquities inspector. And I thought, yeah, this is endorphins. And when I get back to the hotel, this pain's going to come back with a vengeance. But it never did come back. So there had been a real healing that day. And that was the real life-changing event because at that time, I still had my acoustics consultancy business. And when I went back to the UK with no pain, right, I began immediately to wind up that business. It actually took 2 years, to wind the business up. It was quite a good sized business. It took me 2 years, but then I transitioned into science and I began to study how can sound heal the body, especially how can it mediate pain to this degree and actually heal me within only 20 minutes. And that's the starting point of what really, it's almost 30 years ago now, this, isn't it? I mean, 1997 to today, it's only one more year and it'll be 30 years. But now I have a deep knowledge of this subject and, of course, of cymatics.
What a journey. Well, I mean, as you were talking, I was just getting all these like flashes of goosebumps and it's just to me it's incredible. And in a way also just it makes so much sense because for me the world started with sound. I mean, we can talk a little bit more about how sound becomes light and and what that looks like, but sound is to me the most powerful tool we have, in our bodies. And we are just energy, we are just frequency, but we tend to forget that. And we get so locked up in our humanness and our emotions. And yet we have this incredibly divine tool within us as a voice, or even just being able to use our body to create sound that can actually heal us. So how's that worked for you in your practice? Like how have you had people come to you and say, like, I want to be healed? Have you used music for healing?
It's a nice thought, but I have, and I'm now a teacher, I actually teach with the Shift Network, so I teach courses on this. So it warms my heart, to be able to share this knowledge that I've acquired over this almost 3 decades. And I think one of the best ways that I can approach this for you and for your listeners and viewers is to talk a little bit about beauty, which is actually not a subject that I get much chance to talk about, but I think this is a great opportunity because without getting too technical about this subject, I think everyone can understand beauty. And it is one of my favorite subjects. And so regarding beauty, nature rewards us with the secretion of feel-good hormones when we experience beauty. I'm talking here about, for example, dopamine, which has wonderful benefits for our immune system. So it seems that nature has evolved this really clever closed loop system in which the experience of all forms of beauty is repaid by hormones that support optimal health. But when we are in optimal health, we naturally seek out beauty. So one of the areas of beauty that I'm referring to in this instance, well, we could talk about many different forms of beauty, the beauty of the human body, the beauty of all forms of art, both paintings, sculptures, and of course music, which we can touch upon in our conversation today. But where I'd like to begin with this subject is the beautiful sounds of nature and how nature arranged for us to absorb those sounds and why nature arranged for us to absorb those sounds, because they are deeply healing. So The sounds of nature, here I'm referring to the sound of the wind in the trees. There's this wonderful English word, sirism, begins with a PSI, sirism. It's the sound of the wind in the trees. And if you record that sound and you look at it on a spectrum analyzer, you will see that it covers the whole of the audio spectrum, the whole of your ability to hear, and even beneath your ability to hear. In other words, subsonic frequencies. You can only hear down to about 16 hertz, very, very low frequency. But of course, below that, all the way down to zero, there are sounds. And nature provides all of those sounds with the sound of the wind in the trees. Also, the sound of white water rivers, which, everyone I think is familiar with this term white noise. And it does come from such waterfalls, white water rivers, also the sound of ocean waves breaking on the seashore. All of that is white noise, and it comes from white water. Well, again, if you were to record any of those sounds, those beautiful sounds of nature, and look at them on a spectrum analyzer, again, you would see covering the whole of the audio spectrum. Now, let's come now to talk about the healing aspects of those sounds and how nature arranged this for us. It's really a wonderful little story because it relates to our ears. Now, obviously, you would think, well, we have ears. The purpose of ears is to collect sound from the environment so we can hear, right? So these, what are technically called pinners, the outer ears, also sometimes called the auricle of the ear. That's how nature has arranged things so that we can collect sound. It's a little bit like having two mini parabolic dishes, on our head that are collecting the sounds of nature. That's all very well understood, of course. The sounds go through the auditory canal, left and right. They move, the vibrations of the air move the tympanic membrane, and so on into the cochlea, where the sounds are ultimately interpreted and become electrical signals that go to the brain so we can actually sense the environment. All of that is common knowledge, right? But what I'm going to share right now is not so commonly known, and that is that there is a second purpose for the pinners, the auricle of the ear, and it is to collect the sounds of nature. And nature has arranged this in a wonderful way, because I'm going to refer now to the vagus nerve system in the body. Now, the vagus nerve, when it leaves the brain stem, it first branches off straight to the pinna of our ears. Immediately from the pinna of our ears, it branches to the pharynx and the larynx. Now, this is all very good news, because the sounds of nature, if you think back, to caveman and woman days, before any kind of technology in this world, many thousands of years ago, or even back a million years to the dawn of Homo sapiens, way back. Nature has arranged it so that this vagus nerve is collecting the sounds of nature, not just so that we can hear, but to feed into our vagus nerve system. That is why nature took the vagus nerve straight from the brainstem, straight to the pinna of the ears. It's constantly picking up sounds that feed into the vagus system in order to improve vagal tone, or let's say to optimize vagal tone. Why is this so important, and why did nature arrange this? Because the vagus nerve is not only the longest nerve, or pair of nerves, it's not one nerve, it's two nerves. It's not only the longest nerves in the body, but also innervates all of the major organs. So when it leaves the pharynx and the larynx, it then goes to the lungs, it goes to your heart, it goes to your liver, to your kidneys, to your spleen, to your gut, etc. Right? All of these major elements of your body are connected, are innervated from the brain via the vagus nerve. And this is why, by the way, if someone has break in their spinal column, they fall off a horse or whatever it is, and they snap their spinal cord, this is why they can carry on living, because all of those major elements of the body are being connected to the brain. They're innervated, in other words, via the vagus nerve. But what's been discovered in recent times, maybe just the last decade, I would say, that's been so important and will become so important to medical science in the future, is that optimal stimulation of the vagus nerve can reverse chronic inflammation in the body and has many other medical benefits. So you might know, Nicole, that chronic inflammation, when it occurs in the body, cannot be reversed by taking a pill. There is no pharmacological substance that you can take that will fix that problem for you. If you've got chronic inflammation, say you have fibromyalgia or some form of autoimmune disease, for example, and these kind of diseases can be extremely painful, by the way. It's not just debilitating, it's also very painful to have these kind of diseases. Any kind of disease that chronic inflammation is the basis of, very painful. Nothing that any medical doctor can give you that's going to fix that problem. But researchers have found, just in the last few years, that by optimal stimulation of the vagus nerve system, you can indeed reverse chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is underpinned by very small proteins in the bloodstream called cytokines. And medics talk about a cytokine storm or a cytokine war, where there are literally two types of cytokines that are battling with each other. And that's essentially what underpins chronic inflammation in the body. When the vagus nerve is optimally stimulated, as I will now describe how to do that, then this cytokine storm calms down and basically goes away. So within just a matter of a few weeks of therapy, by what I'm going to describe now, no more chronic inflammation. Imagine that, right? How wonderful. Millions of people all over the world right now, Nicole, in pain and debilitation. And yet, if they knew about what I'm about to describe, that would all just go away, right? So isn't this wonderful? That sound has this
I,
ability, and that nature showed the way. It's nature
yeah.
who's telling us, Mother Nature is saying, look at what I've done here. Look, I've taken the vagus nerve to the outer ears. Why did I do that? Right?
Mm.
Well, now comes, the reason. Now, there are two different ways that you can optimally stimulate the vagus nerve. And the two different ways relate to electricity in the body. And I'm just actually now writing an article called The Liquid Crystal Human, and that will be ultimately it will be shared on the CymaScope app, which we should talk about a little bit, before the end of this. But this article, The Liquid Crystal Human, refers to the piezoelectric properties of human beings. Now, I think it's common knowledge about a crystal. If you have one of nature's, crystals in your hand, for example, I think it's fairly common knowledge that if you strike that crystal in a dark place, you will see a spark jump off there. In fact, it's the crystalline properties, of some types of stone like flint that, again, going back to caveman and woman days, they used that as a means of, if you strike the flint, it will create sparks, and that will, light your fire with that, right? That's one of the ways. Well, the reason that happens is because a crystal, the way that the atomic structure is in a crystal, that if you slightly deform it, it will create electricity. It's normally in balance, but if you deform it by striking it, for example, then it goes slightly out of balance, and in that state, electricity is created in the crystal. Well, your body has many different aspects of it which are have liquid crystal properties. For example, the fascia material, all the connective tissues in your body have piezoelectric properties. All of your nerves in your body have piezoelectric properties, right? So now, I'm giving you that little bit of background science just so that you know how it is that there are two different ways that you can optimally stimulate your vagus nerve. So there's probably a lot of people listening and watching this now who are interested because either they have some form of illness that they think will be helped by optimal vagus nerve stimulation, or perhaps they know someone, a friend or a family member, someone in their family circle perhaps who has chronic inflammation. So what I'm about to share will be important. First of all, you can optimally stimulate your vagus nerve system electrically. It's not particularly pleasant, and it usually concerns attaching two little electrodes onto your earlobes. That's one of the popular ways to do it. And there are benefits. There's great benefits to it, but it's not particularly pleasant, as I say. There's an FDA approved device called Alpha-Stim, Alpha-Stim, STIM. That's one of the many different devices. There's another one that goes around your neck and stimulates, because the vagus nerve goes down your neck, two sides of your neck. So there's another one that goes around your neck. Again, not very pleasant to experience. But what I'm about to share now is very pleasant. And I'm now referring to music, because music, when it goes straight into the pinna of the ears, you now know from what I've described that the musical frequencies go straight into the pinna and straight down into the vagus nerve system. However, the scientists the medical physics scientists who have made these discoveries concerning optimal vagus nerve stimulation have found, very strangely in some respects, that the ideal frequencies, the optimal frequencies, are below human hearing. So below 16 hertz. 16 hertz is the lowest that you can hear. So we're now talking about frequencies as low as 5 and 10 hertz. Now, as I described a little bit earlier there, those frequencies are available in nature, from the sound of the wind in the trees and the white water, as we've already discussed. But I made a discovery way back in the COVID era when, we were in lockdown, Nicole, and a lot of people were having to work from home. Well, I always do work from home. But what it meant was, the phone stopped ringing. I was receiving hardly any emails during that time. People were really locked down, weren't they? And what it did for me, it allowed me to work without any kind of interruption in my lab here. I still work in my lab even when I get interrupted, but this was a really wonderful time for me. I know that it was a horrible time for most people, and a lot of people even lost their lives through COVID. But as the old saying goes, every cloud has a silver lining. And in this case, the silver lining was a discovery that I made, how to optimally stimulate the vagus nerve with music. So all of music, if you listen to music through headphones, this is the ideal way to do it for optimal vagus stimulation, because obviously the pinna of the ears is going to get, full stimulation, isn't it, from the headphones. But when you listen to music normally, about the lowest frequency you will ever receive from music, even via headphones, normally will be 20 hertz. The reason for that, Nicole, is because in the recording studios where they master the music, before they put it onto a CD or put it out into the world as a digital file, they master it. And in that mastering process, they roll off all frequencies below 20 hertz. And the reason that is done is because speaker systems, even the best speaker systems in the world, cannot handle anything lower than that. So why put that energy onto a CD or into a digital file? Well, you wouldn't want to do it, because actually, if you do it, the speaker will flap about quite badly and create all sorts of horrible artifacts. You don't want them. So that's why they do that in the recording studio. What I found during lockdown, working here in my lab, is that certain albums of music, when they are played, produce new frequencies that are below 20 hertz, way down to 4 and 5 hertz. And this is something that I've named audio-heterodyning. Now, heterodyning is very well known in the electronics industry, particularly in the broadcast electronics industry, where you mix two frequencies together to create sum, S-U-M, and difference frequencies. This is a natural process of mixing frequencies together. Very well known in electromagnetism, in broadcast, particularly in broadcast engineering, but never heard of in audio engineering until I made this discovery. And I was so happy to be able to make this discovery because I knew that ultimately this could help millions and millions of people to recover their health from chronic inflammation and many other diseases, by the way. It's not just chronic inflammation. You know, chronic inflammation underpins cancer. You know, anyone who has chronic inflammation, if it's not sorted out, ultimately will almost certainly result in a cancer. And so this is going to help so many people. So what it is, certain albums of music, when they play, create in real time these extremely low frequencies, which nature has told us is ideal for optimal stimulation of the vagus nerve. So this happened with the very first album that I tried to test was called Dream of the Blue Whale, and it's by two dear friends of ours, Anders Holt, Holte, and Kachina Miadu. These two friends of ours are musicians. Anders is a Danish vocalist, and Kachina is a German keyboard player, piano player, both experts in their art, and they work together and they create this most sublime music. So what I was really interested in was to see what's the lowest note or the lowest pitch that Anders can sing. I obviously thought it'd probably be down to something like 60 or maybe 70 hertz, something like that. But I also knew about what's called subharmonics. So I was thinking along those lines. I wonder if, you know, in Anders' voice, there are any subharmonics below 60 or 70 hertz. Well, what I discovered that day, Nicole, in COVID era, 2022, I think it was, is that when that particular album plays, there are these wonderful frequencies going down to 4 and 5 hertz, which the researchers had discovered were optimal for vagus stimulation. And I was really surprised by this because I'd never encountered anything like this before in the whole of my career, both in engineering and in science. So it is a new discovery. And now I've created a list of many albums that we've tested from our own. We've got a really eclectic taste, my wife and I, Annalise and I, and I tested many albums. Very strangely, only a very few % of the albums have this effect, the audio-heterodyne healing effect. So what I've done, and I think it would be wonderful if you would share it, you know, with your listeners and your viewers, is a list of these albums that people can buy that have this healing effect. And one other aspect of this that I think is really important to mention is that to be able to receive the optimal healing, you have to listen through high quality headphones, not through those little earbuds that have become so popular today. They have a frequency response that ends at 20 hertz, and not through any kind of Wi-Fi headphones. All Wi-Fi headphones, all Bluetooth headphones, they also cut off at 20 hertz. You have to have cord attached headphones. These are headphones that you literally plug in. That's the only kind of headphones. And then you look at the frequency response, the published frequency response, and you look for 5 hertz. Now I've got this list, as I mentioned, that I'm happy to share with everyone. And at the head of this list are the type of headphones that I recommend by a company called Bayer Dynamic. There are other headphones that you can buy. If you just look for the frequency response, make sure it starts at 5 hertz. Most headphones start at 20 hertz. So that's why I'm saying you must look for that frequency response. But this is going to be a wonderful future, Nicole, when this eventually, is rolled out into the world, because I'm now developing a system that people can buy where you get everything in a package, including the music itself on an app, connected to an amplifier, headphone amplifier, connected to high quality headphones. This is a healing system. And how wonderful it is that just by experiencing beautiful music, coming back to that, the idea of the healing aspect of beauty, by experiencing beautiful music, that we can heal many different diseases. So I mentioned about chronic inflammation and obviously the potential for even supporting cancer. In fact, there's a wonderful paper study that's been conducted showing that optimal vagus stimulation can improve cancer prognosis by up to 50%, which is amazing. So it can help so many people, and many other diseases, even including diabetes type 2, can be supported. And again, the reason is because the vagus nerve, in this case, literally innervates the pancreas. And so when you stimulate the pancreas optimally, then the beta cells, which are not producing effectively, in people that have diabetes type 2, can be stimulated to restart, to keep supplying insulin into the system. So it's a wonderful future that lies ahead.
I'm so excited about everything that you've shared with me. And I know when we spoke beforehand, I said I really want to title this episode, and I'm emotional about what you just explained to me, because I first of all, I want to say you have so much passion, which is just so wonderful, and how you followed your joy and your journey of life is just, it's really inspiring. And I hope for everyone listening, you can feel that inspiration, to really follow the nudges of what your heart wants you to do. I think closing a business is not easy, but look at what you've come to now, and I'm just so excited to see that. I always say music is life, but music is generally, it authentically is life, and exactly what you're explaining now. It can give us living. It can put us in a state of feels living. And so, yeah, I feel that calling this episode Your Frequency, Your Feels Life, we always talk about the feels life being that life that gives you joy, that you live authentically, that you are in a healthy, balanced state of being, and yeah, that you just get to live the life we're here to live. I always say we're very divinely powerful beings, and we kind of a soul having a human experience. But what you were talking about reminds me of that. It's almost like, in a way, maybe through the vagus nerve, opening that channel to really receive what is so beautiful in nature to give to us. And a couple of episodes ago on this season, we also had a lady talk about what two girls came together, and they're sound engineers and also musicians themselves, and they started capturing sounds in nature, like acoustic saunas, and wanting to create that in cities so that people can go in and experience nature and the sounds of nature in busy cities, because we are so overwhelmed by all the stimulus of all the buses and trains and all of that. And perhaps the frequencies are doing us well, we don't know, but the stress of it all. So I feel like there might be a wonderful collaboration for you guys to chat about in the future. And I'm sure there's so much more that we can chat about. I really am very interested in the Goldilocks principle that you spoke about. So I would love for us to have more conversations on that.
Can we talk a little bit about that now then?
Yes, by all means, go for it.
Because, obviously one of the aspects to, again, coming back to Mother Nature, why did nature innovate, go from the pinna of the ear with the vagus nerve? Why did it then go to the pharynx and the larynx next? Why is it innovating via the voice, for example? And this is obviously another clue. Mother Nature is saying to us, use your voice to heal. That's exactly what nature is saying to us. I mean, obviously we use the voice to communicate, but it's also, we're walking around with this healing tool, and most people are completely unaware of that aspect of nature and their own voice. So again, coming back to Anders and Kachina, their beautiful music. If you listen to that album, Dream of the Blue Whale, you'll be so surprised how beautiful it is. And one of the aspects to it, of course, is Anders' really deep, rich, resonant voice. Now, I know that Anders is a very healthy human being, and one of the reasons for that, of course, is the fact that he is a vocalist. He's using his voice. He's using his voice primarily before he met me. Anders and Kachina, working together as a musical duo, really they knew nothing about the healing properties of the music that they were creating. And they traveled the world onto big stages, 10,000 people in an arena, making beautiful music, yes, and everyone, of course, appreciating their music, but no one perhaps in the audience even realizing the healing effect that they were receiving. So when I, started to become friends with Anders and Kachina and listen to their beautiful music, very often at breakfast time, Annalise and I will listen to Dream of the Blue Whale because it just washes over us so beautifully, to start the day. But of course, I was able to share with Anders and Kachina how deeply healing that music is. Now, coming back to this idea of vocalizations, it's very well known, I think, at least in some circles, certainly in the circles that I move in, that our voice is deeply healing. And if we have, again, coming back to nature, pointing to nature, if you think about a cat that's injured, it will purr and purr and purr and purr. One clever scientist, this is many years ago now, going back, I think almost 20 years, thought about that. Why does a cat purr? Which, you think of a cat purring from a point of view of contentment. If you have a cat on your lap and you're stroking it, it will purr. But that's from point of view of contentment, isn't it? But why would a creature purr? In other words, use energy when it's injured. So if a cat has an injury, it purrs even more. And so anyway, this clever scientist many years ago had this idea that perhaps it's purring to heal itself. And so they did a study with it. And indeed, it turned out that these very low frequencies are literally healing. Say the cat has a broken bone, it will heal that broken bone way faster than if it didn't purr, right? So this was, a real discovery. Now we know far more, of course, today, almost 20 years later, we know that the voice has wonderful healing benefits in so many different ways. I'm going to describe, one or two of them for you now. First of all, the vagus nerve, again, it innervates, the vagus nerve innervates the larynx. So when you make your own vocal sounds, even when you're talking, never mind when you're making singing or toning or chanting sounds, any of those sounds that you create all help to support vagal tone. So that's one of the ways. And obviously vagal tone, as I've already mentioned, is critical for the homeostasis, for the healthy working of a human being. One of the other ways that's not so well known is stimulation of nitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide is the second most important molecule in the body, apart from the water, your hydration, which obviously is critical to life. And then the second most important is oxygen, because if you don't have oxygen, none of the healing mechanisms in your body would work. So first water molecules, then oxygen, critical, then nitric oxide. Well, nitric oxide is a gas that's created in several different places in your body, but mostly in your paranasal sinus cavities and in your lungs. Now, this is how the voice creates this very important molecule. What happens in your paranasal sinus cavities, particularly when you make sound that goes up into those cavities, a kind of nasally sound. And makes me laugh a little bit about American, because many Americans, and my wife is American, right? And if you've probably noticed this, Nicole, that American voices very often have this nasal quality. And it makes me smile to think about it, because I think, wow, they're doing themselves such a favor that they probably are completely unaware of, because that when you create energy, vocal energy that goes up into your nasal cavities, the French, of course, they also have this nasality, don't they? The French people. Anyway, the point is that this vocal energy that goes up into your sinus cavities creates copious amounts of nitric oxide. And the frequency ranges there are quite high. We're talking about 1000 hertz to 2000 hertz for those people who understand those numbers. In your lungs, the resonant frequencies are much lower. They're like between 100 hertz and 150 hertz, so quite low frequencies. But the thing is, both of those ranges, right from 100 all the way up to, say, 2000, are all available in your vocal apparatus. I suppose some female voices might struggle a little bit with 100, but I think most female voices can get down to 100 hertz. So all of those frequencies stimulate nitric oxide. And why is this a good thing? Well, it's a great thing, because nitric oxide, one of its primary roles in the body, is to create vasodilation, meaning all of your vascular system, all of the blood vessel walls are relaxed when you've got optimal nitric oxide flowing in them, right? So this is a really important gas in the body, and it can be created by vocalizations. And one of the other things that just pops into my mind right now concerns the ancient Egyptians. They had, I'm sure you know about sistra. I'll get one right now because I've got one here. A sistrum instrument, right? For those of you who are listening and not watching, it's a beautiful instrument that the ancient Egyptians made and used for thousands of years. Well, I made a discovery in an Egyptian text not all that long ago now, actually, in a book by a woman called Lisa Manniche, who was, I think the title of the book is Music and Musicians in Ancient Egypt. Anyway, I made this little discovery that really pleased me this day, because she was talking about the festival of Opet in ancient Egypt, where they used the sistrum instrument and they rattled it in front of the nostrils. So I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something like to give rejuvenating breath, right? Inferring that they knew that these high frequencies, because you do get very high frequencies from that rattling sound, certainly way up to 2000 hertz and probably way beyond, they are optimal frequencies for creating nitric oxide, right? So if you rattle a sistrum instrument in front of your nostrils, in front of your nose, you will be getting copious amounts of nitric oxide created. And I just thought that was wonderful that the ancient Egyptians somehow knew that. Whether, I don't know exactly how they would have ever discovered that. I'm sure they wouldn't know about nitric oxide, but what they might know is that this rejuvenating effect, you get a wonderful feeling. I get a very strange feeling actually in my body when I do that rattle. It really is, I can't describe it. It's really odd, an odd kind of sensation. And anyway, we'll probably all experience that a little bit differently, but I'm just excited by that idea that nitric oxide from our own vocal apparatus can be created when we go into a little bit of nasality. But even without that, you're still going to get a lot of nitric oxide. Why is all of this important? Well, vasodilation leads to more oxygen in the bloodstream. So if you have nice relaxed vascular system, your veins, your arteries are all nicely relaxed, it means that your blood pressure will be in the normal range. Instead of hypertension, for example, it will come down into a normal range. And when you have blood pressure in a normal range, then the oxygen is flowing optimally through your blood. And that means that all of the healing mechanisms in your body that require oxygen to power them are going to get that oxygen. And that's why nitric oxide is so important, right? So it's all, all beautifully linked together. And by the way, this idea of hypoxia is something that, I'm sure that some of your viewers and listeners will be interested in from the point of view is, well, how did John Stuart Reid's lower back get magically healed in 20 minutes, right? And it all comes back to hypoxia, which of course means muscles that have very little oxygen in them, right? And what happens in your body when you have an injury to your spine, as I did, the spina erector muscles go into spasm. This is part of nature again, protecting, in this case, the injury until it can be healed by the body. So in other words, it's a little bit like a cramp, Nicole. You know how cramps can be so painful? Well, when your spina erector muscles go into a spasm, automatically when you have an injury, the spasm creates far more pain than the injury itself. And this is why that day when I went into the pyramid, I was in such agony. It was so painful. But what happened is that within 20 minutes, the sound that I was creating was actually releasing the spasm because of more oxygen that was entering into my bloodstream. And I can describe very briefly how that happens. It's simply, and this is another discovery that I made, in this case in collaboration with Professor Sungchul Ji of Rutgers University. What we discovered was that music has the ability to rejuvenate old red blood cells and make them effectively new again. We made this as a long story. We don't have time to go into it. But the essence of it is that low frequencies, particularly low frequencies, cause more oxygen to bind to hemoglobin. And this again is a clue from Mother Nature. Every time there's a heartbeat in your body, that heartbeat, if you think about it, Nicole, that is a beat of low frequency sound. If you study the spectrum analysis of a heartbeat, if you listen to it, you're monitoring it with a stethoscope, and then you look at it on a spectrum, you will see that nearly all the energy is in the low frequency area. And what it means is that those low frequencies, every time there's a pulse from a heartbeat, that pulse of low frequency sound causes oxygen that's already dissolved in your bloodstream from every breath you take, causes that oxygen to bind to the hemoglobin in the red bloodstream, in the red blood cells. And what we discovered, Professor G and I, is that old red blood cells in your body, because your body is constantly making new red blood cells, and the old ones ultimately die and are mopped up by your body systems. But what we discovered is that old red blood cells can be made young again by having more oxygen. And this is exactly what happened in my body in the Great Pyramid all those years ago. I was creating very low frequency sound during that cymatics experiment. Those low frequencies were penetrating into my vascular system and causing more oxygen to be bound to the hemoglobin and causing the hypoxia that had my spina erector muscles in tight spasm, causing them to relax and to release the spasm. Hence, the pain went away. In other words, the healing of my lower back had largely been already happened in the 3 weeks before going out to Egypt, but the spasm had not yet released. So what nature had done was then helped by the low frequency sound in the King's Chamber that day, causing the hypoxia to vanish and causing the pain to vanish as well, leaving me a healthy, whole human being. And it took a very long time to discover that mechanism, but now, of course, we understand it fully. So it's wonderful.
Thank you for sharing all of that. It's just, to me, the word miraculous just comes up, because it is really life is such a miracle, and you discovering all these things are miracles that are to be shared with the world. And Thank you for explaining all of it so nicely. I mean, I studied biology at school, and I always feel like the things we study at school doesn't really touch on how we can live holistically, how we really understand our bodies. And I feel like now only are we starting to understand how to harness these vessels that we were given, to the best of our abilities, so that we can live a joyous life and free of pain and following our joy. And yeah, so I just want to say a huge thank you for sharing all of that. And I have one or two more questions for you, just because we always do that on the Your Happy Hour podcast. And this being our last episode, this is no exception. So before I do that, I just want to give a quick thank you also on the topic of gratitude to our partners, rss.com, and to the Blender Bomb Company, and to BN eSIM for walking a journey with us across the season. We really appreciate you guys. And again, on the topic of gems, I want to ask you if you've had any gems this week. So this is our little segment that we talk about. I feel like you have gems all the time with your discoveries. But just in the last week, have you had anything that, you feel like you've learned, or that's come up for you? And for me, it's been really a big shift in kind of closing a chapter in my life and having to move on physically, also moving tomorrow, and just letting go of a lot of the old, and as you were talking about rejuvenation, sometimes we're quite resistant to that change. And maybe that's where music's so beautiful, because it gets to help us, or where vibration is so incredible, it gets to kind of release us from that quite quickly. But as a human, you sometimes want to hold on, and your emotions want to hold on. And so that's been a really big theme for me in this last week, is just really acknowledging that some of the mindsets that I had, it's okay. It's okay to let those go now and be new and be rejuvenated. So what has it been for you?
Well, in my case, I think this last Sunday, an event occurred which I was so deeply grateful for. Well, your listeners will not perhaps know yet, but you know that my darling Annalise suffered a stroke 2.5 years ago. This is a kind of unusual type of stroke. Most strokes occur in the cortex, but in Annalise's case, no. This is a cerebellum stroke. So a cerebellum stroke affects the area of the brain at the base of the base of the brain stem. This organ, it's part of the brain, it's called the cerebellum, and it controls all of the motor aspects of your body. And in Annalise's case, 2.5 years ago, she had a stroke in that area, tiny little area. I saw the scan of the cerebellum after they had scanned her in the hospital, and it's about the size of a petit pois pea. I mean, it's tiny little area, about 4 or 5 millimeters in diameter, very small area, but it's dead. That area is dead now because of a blood vessel that became blocked, right? So what that meant for Annalise was that on the day that she came out of a hospital, she couldn't speak at all. I mean, like a tiny whisper, and only maybe one word at a time. And so it was very, very difficult to communicate with Annalise during that time in her life. And also her balance was astonishingly wobbly. She couldn't walk without significant help. And all of that came about because of this damage to this tiny little area of the cerebellum, right? Well, where my huge gratitude comes from is just this last Sunday, because gradually this is one of the things, before I get to that, just to mention, and I still don't really understand the scientific reason for this, but when Annalise first, well, within say 2 or 3 weeks of coming out of hospital after the stroke, she couldn't walk 100 meters without being hugely out of breath. I mean, massively, as if she'd just run a marathon, literally, and yet it was only 100 yards or 100 meters, right? And there's still no medic that I've spoken with has been able to adequately describe why. Normally your fitness, anyone's fitness, is built up over many years of doing whatever exercise you might do. And the underpinning of all of that are all the little capillaries that riddle through your muscles in your body and feed your muscles with oxygen, of course, and nutrients, right? This is what fitness is. The really, really fit people, their muscles are riddled with, thousands and thousands of these little capillaries to create great transport for oxygen and to be able to take away waste product and so on. In an unfit person, you have very few capillaries. So this is why an unfit person, runs a couple of 100 yards or meters and is completely out of breath, whereas a fit person wouldn't be, right? So the underpinning of these capillaries, now they don't dry up overnight, Nicole. Okay, Annalise was in hospital for a couple of weeks, and then, maybe another couple of weeks of rehabilitation at home before we first started trying to walk with Annalise, me supporting her, of course. And yet she was so hugely out of breath. Nothing to do with the capillaries. They don't dry up in a couple of weeks, right? It takes months for them to dry up. So we still don't know the reason, but what I can tell you is that over those 2.5 years, there's been a gradual increase in her fitness. Not quite to the standard where she was before, because before the stroke, Annalise could walk up a mountain with hardly being out of breath. But what happened on Sunday, coming to the crux of it now, on Sunday, we walked up a local mountain, not terribly steep, but one of our local mountains. It has a gorgeous view from the top. I mean, really beautiful. And it was a beautiful sunny day. And with minimal help from me, literally holding her hand and just giving a little bit of tugging on her hand, she was able to walk up this mountain. I was so full of gratitude for that event, because, what it says is that eventually my darling will get all of her faculties back. She still, as you know, she has a little bit of aphasia. This, speech quality is not quite back to where it was before, but it's coming. It's a slow process. And I don't exactly know, again, why the brain is so much slower to heal than the body, but it's true, it is. And in the case of Annalise, maybe it'll take another year or so before she has retained all her faculties. But, I'm just so deeply grateful for that beautiful event on Sunday.
Yeah. I'm so grateful with you, and I, even just in the times that I've spoken to her, with about 6 weeks in between, the improvement was just incredible. It was mind blowing to me, actually, and thank you for sharing that. I'm so happy with you guys, and I'm sure when we have a discussion again quite soon, it will be another milestone that's been reached. And on that, I also want to give a little shout out to what we call the people, places, and spaces out in the world, and that's sometimes a person, sometimes an organization. And this was actually a place here in Paris. It's a boat on the Seine, and they host events. And I went to an event recently of a dear friend now who makes the most incredible music. And he is basically a DJ but plays the violin and electric guitar on top of that. And he's created this whole concerto. And I went to his concerto, it's like his album release, and he had the trumpet player and the trombone player and the saxophone player, and they were all playing live music, but on top of this electro, and he took us through a whole journey. And anyway, I wanted to give a shout out to the place, because hosting a beautiful event like that, and I just felt like the decor and the space was so incredible. And a huge shout out to Verdi as well for his music, and for just sharing his open heart through music is what was so wonderful. So we love your feels, both of you, and thank you for sharing that with us. And then, John, I actually just have one more question for you, and that is our reading list. So we have book recommendations to our audience. And for those of you who are keen to go and check out the website, all the books that get recommended by the guests are on there. And it's called The Stack. So I want to ask you, what is in your stack that you can recommend?
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I've got many favorite books. The one talking about, non-fiction books, I would definitely highly recommend a book by Georgi Doski. It's called The Power of Limits. I spell this the power of limits, obviously you can easily remember that, but this Georgi Doski, it's strange, a strange a couple of words. I'll spell them out for you. So Georgi is Georgy, and then Doski is Doczzi. So that's, I would pronounce that Georgi Doski. I don't know how you pronounce it, but anyway, his book, The Power of Limits, is an absolutely gorgeous book with beautiful illustrations of the golden ratio, the golden mean, which is prevalent throughout all of life. But the golden mean, I don't think Georgi Doski mentions it in his book, but I'm going to mention it right now. The sound, all sound frequencies contain the golden ratio, right? And so this is why, you're referring to that wonderful musician on the Seine, that all of his music is creating the golden ratio that's entering into your body, even down to the level of the DNA, because the DNA itself has the golden ratio embedded in it. So literally, you're immersing yourself in music that's literally speaking to your DNA. Anyway, coming back to the book, it is the most wonderful book, the way that he looks at the human form, the physiognomy, creatures like butterflies, fish, insects, all of it is looked at from the point of view of the golden ratio and how nature has produced all of this for us to now enjoy and wonder at. So that's a wonderful book.
Thank you for that recommendation. I'm definitely going to be adding that to my stack. I feel like even after speaking to you today, I have so much research that I need to do. So thank you. I'm sure everyone is going to enjoy listening to this podcast, to be reading that book. And for you who's listening out there, I wonder what you are feeling about your frequency, about how you are vibrating, what you are putting into your body, perhaps how you are cultivating a feels life through sound or not. And maybe it's time to start doing that. And if you want to reach out to John, we'll make sure everyone can find you on the socials and also find the app. And I know you do something really beautiful called DNA signatures, which is super unique. And I'd love to showcase that a bit more to our audience. So we're going to put all of this in for people to find. And wow, yes. I'm just looking at the app here as John is showing me, and is this my voice? Wow. So I'm seeing the most beautiful images of my voice. I could probably look at this all day long. It's fascinating. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, John. You're going to mesmerize me. This is what hypnotism is.
Yes, the app makes any sound frequencies visible, but the part of it that I'm most proud of, actually, Nicole, are the articles section, which are free, within the app. You buy the app for about $12, and then you get all these articles for free, all on the subject of frequency medicine. So I'm very proud of it from that point of view.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that and for sharing your heart so openly today and your life through sound with us. And yeah, just thanks for your time being here.
Been a great pleasure, Nicole. I hope that we can chat some more another time because there's so much more to discuss.
So much more, definitely. This is episode 1 of many, absolutely.
Many blessings. Thank you so much.
And to you too. If you haven't just yet, follow Friday Feels on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and LinkedIn. You can share with us all your feels this week by tagging us at fridayfeels.co. And you can also find the website at that handle. And now, as you ease into this weekend, take a moment. Celebrate who you've become, what you've overcome, and what is yet to come as you do the crazy and cool things that you do as the authentic you. The truth about life and work is that it's hard, but the beauty is this global working experience that you're in, well, we're in it together. So keep connecting, empowering, and inspiring this week. And of course, keep it raw and real. Until next time.